Hello, and thank you for watching. My name is Bradford Roberts, principal broker, founder, and owner of TR Realty in the Las Vegas area. After watching this video, please be sure to like it as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel. Download the pertinent handouts for this video by clicking the link in the comments below. Now let's get started. This video is entitled Class 2 Real Estate Behind the Scenes. This segment is entitled Title and Escrow. I recommend Driggs Title Agency. Now, I've been in real estate a long time and I've worked with a lot of title companies, and I can tell you none have served me or the associates at TR Realty the way Driggs Title Agency has. I recommend them highly. They're definitely worth fighting for in your transaction. And our assigned escrow officer, Kyle Wallace, is an attorney. So we have that incredible added benefit of having an attorney as an escrow officer to smooth out some of the wrinkles that are inevitable in a real estate transaction. Driggs Title Agency also has Spanish-speaking and Mandarin Chinese-speaking escrow officers. Because of our partnership and our arrangement with Driggs Title Agency, our associates can actually get their commission the same day the file is released to record. Let me say that again. Not just recorded, but when the file is released to record, Driggs Title Agency can release commission directly to a TR Realty associate via wire or via paper check at any one of our branch locations. That depends on how the associate would like to get paid. You can get paid if you use Driggs Title Agency within minutes or an hour or so after a file is released to record. There's nothing faster in the Las Vegas area. Now, what does a title and escrow company actually do? Well, let's start with the name Title and Escrow. And during this video, you'll probably hear me say title company many, many times. I am talking about title and escrow. Here in Nevada, we tend to think of title and escrow as one thing. Actually, in many states, including our neighbor on the left coast, they have title companies and they have escrow companies separate. Here in Nevada, it is pretty much traditionally one thing, title and escrow. So when I say title, I just want you to know it is shorthand for a title and escrow company. So we're going to go through a list of different functions, different components, different services that a title company provides. Starting with, a title and escrow company acts as a neutral third party. In a real estate transaction, parties put money up. Okay, so starting with the earnest money deposit, sometimes there are seller contributions, additional deposits, other places that money can come from while we are awaiting the close of escrow in a transaction. And we need a safe and neutral, disinterested third-party location where we can put those funds. Now, TR Realty does have trust accounts, but we use those trust accounts exclusively for our property management functions. We do not hold EMD at TR Realty. In fact, the vast majority of real estate companies don't hold buyers EMD anymore. There are a few who still do that, but the trend is definitely on the way out for that, because there's just the appearance that when you put your deposit into the trust account of one of the brokers, it seems to be favoring that one side of the transaction. So Driggs will hold our buyer's EMD at no cost, by the way, and it's a safe, neutral location to hold that. Let's talk about how we choose which title company we're going to use in a transaction. When the law is silent on something, anything, any part of a transaction, that issue then becomes a contractual issue. And in Nevada, the law is silent on which party chooses the title and escrow company in a transaction. So what that means is if the law is silent, the parties can negotiate and they can make a decision which title company to use. In Nevada, it is typically, but not the law, it is typically the case where the buyer's agent drafts the purchase and sale agreement. And in that purchase and sale agreement, as you'll see in my series of videos in Class 5, you'll see that there is a paragraph where the buyer's agent can indicate which title company and which escrow officer in that title company the buyer would like to use. However, the seller is absolutely free to counteroffer back and say, I don't want ABC title, I want to use XYZ title. And this becomes a negotiation just like price, just like closing date, or any other component of the purchase and sale agreement. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I believe working with the right title company is something that is worth fighting for. So either party can choose, it's completely negotiable in Nevada. And the title company is going to provide a complete bundle of services to the parties. Let's move on and talk about the phrase open escrow. And I put that phrase in quotes because it's a phrase that real estate agents throw around all the time. Hey, we're going to go open escrow on this file tomorrow. So we use the phrase, but do we really know what it means to open escrow in Nevada? So let's talk about the definition. To open escrow in Nevada means two things have to happen. The first thing that has to happen is somebody, could be anybody, has to provide a fully effectuated copy of the purchase and sale agreement to the title company. And when I say a fully effectuated copy, I'm talking about a copy that has been signed by the parties and delivered to the parties. That is what constitutes a fully effectuated purchase and sale agreement. Now, a lot of people say an executed purchase and sale agreement. In my opinion, that is not the correct language to use. An executed agreement is one that has been completed. So in my opinion, we don't have an executed purchase and sale agreement until we've actually closed escrow. So I like to call it an effectuated agreement, and you'll probably hear me use that word effectuated numerous times in this video as well as other videos as well, meaning it has been signed and delivered to the parties. So the first thing, as I was saying, that has to happen to open escrow is the provision of a fully effectuated purchase and sale agreement. The second thing that constitutes the opening of escrow is the delivery of earnest money deposit. And that can take several forms. Earnest money deposits can be sent directly from the buyer to the title company by wire. Earnest money deposits sometimes constitute a buyer providing a money order or a personal check or a bank check to their agent, who then in turn submits that to the title company. So however we get that earnest money into the title company, the delivery of that earnest money is the second component of opening escrow. Okay? So opening escrow, two things: providing a fully effectuated copy of the contract and the delivery of the earnest money deposit. Now, when we talk about that earnest money deposit, let's talk about the third service that Driggs Title Agency will provide, which is holding that EMD in a trust account. And of course, when we talk about a trust account, we're talking a bank account that has been opened for a specific purpose. And that is the purpose of holding someone else's money in trust. Real estate brokers, attorneys, and some other professionals typically have trust accounts. So that money cannot be commingled with operating funds. They can't take a vacation with that money. It is someone else's money, and they're holding it in trust. Okay? So when it comes to the title company holding EMD in the trust account, we much prefer this as opposed to one of the real estate brokers in the transaction holding those funds. And of course, if a real estate broker is holding earnest money deposit in their own trust account, that is now subject to the oversight of the Nevada Real Estate Division, as compared to when a title company holds earnest money in their trust account. They're not subject to the oversight of the Real Estate Division. They're subject to the Nevada Department of Insurance regulations and oversight. So a little bit different strategy there. And since this service is provided at no cost to real estate agents and brokers, there's a lot of administrative work that goes into trust accounts. We much prefer to put our customers' EMD safely into that title company's neutral trust account. Okay, let's talk about some of the other services that the title company provides. They provide something known as a property profile. Now, I highly recommend that a buyer's agent request a property profile before they write an offer. I also highly recommend that a listing agent obtain a property profile before going out on a listing appointment. In either case, having a property profile gives you a lot of information. A property profile is like a biography of a property, and title companies do them differently, but typically what you'll see in a property profile is tax information, sales information, neighborhood demographics, and other valuable resources that we can use. So it empowers us as a buyer's agent, and it's very impressive to have as part of your listing presentation when you're out on a listing appointment as well. Property profiles come at no cost to us anyway, and they're available from Driggs Title Agency simply upon request. Another service that the title company provides at no cost, I must say, is known as a market report. Now, when I teach classes, and especially when I get into my videos for Class 3, which is my buyer's class, you're going to hear all kinds of data flowing from my class material. And that data is most easily obtained by me and by you as a real estate agent by subscribing to title companies' market reports. Now, different title companies do this differently. Sometimes you can request a particular zip code. Sometimes you can get a market report for an entire city or an entire county. Maybe you just want to get information for Boulder City, or you just want to get information for Summerlin, or maybe just a particular zip code. So you can work with the title company to make that happen. But a market report is a vital piece of information for a real estate professional. And market report will tell you everything from the current inventory situation, whether it's trending up, whether it's trending down, price per square footage, what is the most expensive and least expensive property on the market right now, what is the median rent, what is the median sales price, all kinds of really important and germane information that we need to have at our fingertips when we're working with the public. I personally subscribe to market reports from several different title companies. Some title companies email it to me once a week, sometimes twice a week. It just depends on the company. But I love having that market data at my fingertips. This is a tremendous resource that you can get at no cost to you. This is how you go out there and you talk like a professional. The next thing that title companies provide to us is known as a preliminary settlement statement. I don't want you to confuse this with a preliminary title report, which we'll be talking about in a little while. A preliminary settlement statement will give our customer, whether buyer or seller, and us, some preliminary, means it's subject to change, information on how the numbers are going to look at the end of the transaction. So in the case of asking for a buyer's preliminary settlement statement, it would give us an idea. We have the purchase price, but we also have closing costs, right? All kinds of extra fees that are added into the transaction. What are those fees going to be? Your buyer might very well ask you about those fees rather than you trying to guess. The title company can prepare that for you. And on the seller's side, when a seller is selling a piece of property for X amount of dollars, he has all kinds of costs as well. Commission, title and escrow fees. Who knows, what other expenses the seller might incur. But sellers will often ask their agent, what am I going to net if I sell my property for that price? So that is a preliminary settlement statement. What's interesting about that is until probably, I'm going to say approximately 2008 or so, real estate agents used to prepare something like this for their clients that was known as a net sheet. In other words, what is your customer going to net? What are their expenses going to net in a real estate transaction? Well, the problem with real estate agents doing net sheets is that they don't have the experience and the knowledge to do that. So if they are guessing at closing costs and other expenses in a transaction, they're incurring a huge amount of liability for themselves. They're incurring a lot of liability for the broker, and they're also at risk of making their client upset if their calculations are not accurate. What happened in about 2008 was that short sales became ubiquitous. And for those of you who know about short sales, for those of you who don't, be sure to watch my video series, Class 6, which is all about short sales. But in a short sale transaction, one of the very first things that we need to do is we need to know how much the bank is going to net, okay? Because we are selling short. We are asking the bank to accept a reduced or a short payoff from what is actually owed. Well, the bank's first question is, how much is that amount of money? How much are you asking us to accept? So when short sales became almost 50% of the transactions in Southern Nevada, real estate agents got in the habit of getting these preliminary settlement statements right up front in a transaction so they could provide those to the short sale lender. About that time, title companies got in the habit of preparing those preliminary settlement statements, and that became a change. In other words, even in regular conventional transactions, real estate agents started asking title companies, rather than do a net sheet on their own, to provide a preliminary settlement statement. And here we are about 12 years later. Title companies love to do these. Of course, it does give them an advantage because they think that the real estate agent, the customer, are a lot more likely to use that title company in the transaction. So this is a fabulous free service that the title company provides. Driggs will do it for us all day long at absolutely no cost. And that's why associates at TR Realty do not do net sheets. That ship sailed over a decade ago. Saves you time, saves you risk and liability, and it's a hell of a lot more accurate when we get that provided by the title company. Next thing I want to talk about for title companies is the preparation of CDs. And CD in real estate is short for closing disclosure. Now, in a video here in Class 2, I did invite Kyle Wallace to come and speak to you, and I know that he went over closing disclosures and settlement statements as well. So I'm not going to repeat what he told you. However, closing disclosures came about in 2015 when the CFPB, which is something we talked about in an earlier video today, the CFPB talked about making a settlement statement easier to read and more transparent for the consumer. You see, as part of the Dodd-Frank Act from 2011 that we talked about earlier, the CFPB was created, and they really wanted to improve and increase transparency for the public. And they felt the settlement statement that we were all using back then, known as a HUD-1 settlement statement, was too complicated, that there were a lot of complaints that the public could not understand the contents of the settlement statement. So the CFPB set out to redesign the settlement statement, make the process more transparent, but at the same time, make it more private for the parties. We always used a HUD-1 settlement statement that had both the seller and the buyer's information on the same sheet. in 2015, when the closing disclosure was born, we actually gave the buyer and seller some privacy by making separate closing disclosures for each side. Title companies typically prepare the seller's closing disclosure, unless it's a cash transaction, in which case they can prepare both of them. However, when the laws changed in 2015, lenders became responsible for the content of that closing disclosure. And therefore, since 2015, most lenders chose to prepare their own closing disclosures. And that's why I say that the title company typically prepares the seller's closing disclosure. So as of October 2015, actually October 3rd, 2015, if you'd like to know the exact date, there's no more HUD-1. We're not allowed to use that anymore. It was replaced by the two closing disclosures, but also a third document came in 2015 called a settlement statement. Isn't that interesting that we used to have a HUD-1 settlement statement? The settlement statement that's used now, which does include both sides of the transaction, is no longer called a HUD-1 settlement statement, but it looks an awful lot like the old HUD-1 settlement statement. So we went from a situation where we had one settlement statement in a transaction. The government tried to make that easier and simpler. So what happens now? We typically have three closing documents, two closing disclosures, and one settlement statement in a real estate transaction. I know that's very complicated to understand. Hopefully between my explanation and watching the video that Kyle Wallace at Driggs Title recorded for you, I hope that that becomes a bit more clear. Okay, let's move on and talk about the next thing that a title company does, and that is conducting a title search. So, folks, if you were going to your local insurance agent to get, let's say, car insurance, they would look at your driving history, they'd probably look at your credit, they'd want to see how many tickets and accidents, how long you've been driving, that sort of thing before they quoted you on your car insurance. Well, when it comes to a title company giving title insurance on a property, they also need to investigate the background, and that is the background of the property before they can commit to the cost and even commit to issuing insurance at all. There are many things that the title company will look for when they do their title search. There's a few of the big ones that I'd like to share with you right now. First, title companies, when they do their title search, they want to make sure that they uncover every lien. And folks, what do you think is the most common type of lien on a property? You think that's a tax lien? You think it's an HOA lien? Maybe a mechanic's lien? It's actually none of those things. By far, the most common type of lien on a property is a mortgage, or what we call here in Nevada a deed of trust. And we'll be talking about the difference a bit later. But we want to make sure that the buyer does not inherit any of those seller's liens. We want to make sure all of those liens are satisfactorily paid off and resolved at or before the time of closing. The only way we can ascertain which liens exist on a property is by doing a comprehensive title search. So that is absolutely one of the main, most important reasons that a title company will do a search. Another one is to look for easements. And easement, sometimes called a right-of-way, is when a piece of property has some portion of it that cannot be built on or really used in almost any way. So an easement will allow a right-of-way to perhaps a utility company. Maybe there's a telephone pole or a gas line or something on the property that needs to be accessed by a utility for purposes of repair or replacement. So if we have an easement on our property, we cannot build. We can't put a pool over a gas line, as an example. We can't put a fence and lock that area off. It has to be left accessible to whoever has that lien. Now, if you've got two identical pieces of land side by side, let's say they're on the same street, they're the same size, both of them have an identical house on that land. One has an easement, one does not have an easement. The property with the easement is going to have a lower value, right? Because we're paying taxes on that land, but we can't really use it for much. So an easement is a negative thing on a property for the most part. And that's why if you were a buyer of a property with an easement, you probably want to know that easement existed before you took possession of that property. So that is another thing that will come up in a title search. Another thing that title companies look for is known in the business as encumbrances. Or if the word encumbrance is too difficult for us to pronounce or spell, we also use the word clouds on a title. And that can take many different variations. Some of you might remember, if you go back to 2004, 5, even into 2006, when people were laying in the street in sleeping bags to get their shot at buying new construction. At that time, builders became very cocky, if I may say, and some of them imposed what was known as an anti-flip provision to the deed, meaning that if you were lucky enough to buy new construction from that builder, there's actually some period of time that was recorded against the deed that you couldn't turn around and resell that property. Builders didn't want you to flip their properties. That would drive the price up, and of course, you'd be competing with that builder, right? So that is just one example of another type of encumbrance that could come up. Another thing that comes to my mind right now would be the Southern Nevada Water Authority conservation easement. We're going to talk about that more in Class 3, but basically if you allow the SNWA to come and replace your water features or your grass on your property with more desert-friendly landscaping, they will pay you to do that. But what a lot of people don't understand is that is now a deed restriction that lasts 30 years on the property, and it conveys from buyer to buyer to buyer of that property. So some owner of that property might have taken SNWA money to, let's say, remove their grass, and 5 years later they sell the property to somebody else who wants to put grass back on the property. That money that last owner received would actually need to be paid back to the SNWA, even though the current owner who wants to put the grass in never received those funds. Isn't that something as a buyer you might want to know? Solar panels, another hot button issue that could be an easement on the property. So all of those things are things that we need to discover and are discovered when we do a title search. And one more component of title search comes to mind for me, that is forgery. So, in this current day and age, we're very careful checking ID and that sort of thing. But if you go back decades in the Las Vegas area, older homes, of course, I'm talking about, there were times in the past when title companies might not have been that careful to ascertain the identity of buyers and sellers. And consequently, there may be some forgery that exists on those older deeds. So that is something that we would want to know about, we would want to clear it up, and we would want to resolve that before close of escrow. So, title search, liens, easements, encumbrances, forgery. Basically, we need to make sure that the title is clean and can be legally conveyed to the buyer. Now, a few minutes ago, we were talking about the preliminary settlement statement. And I said, don't confuse the preliminary settlement statement with the preliminary title report. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that PTR, that preliminary title report, right now. The title report comes after the seeing the results of that title search. So all the things we just talked about, liens, easements, encumbrances, forgery, all of those things, when we investigate those things, they all go into a report that we in the real estate industry refer to as a PTR. And as per the contract, the title company is required to provide that PTR to the buyer within 10 business days of opening escrow. I want to caution you on that because it's really important that the buyer gets that PTR in a timely manner. And actually, Driggs Title Agency is not going to wait until that 10 business day mark. They're going to provide that a lot sooner. Some title companies provide the PTR to the agent. Some provide it to the buyer. If you're in a transaction where the title company has sent it to you, it is really, really important that you turn around and forward that PTR to your buyer immediately. Don't chip away at their time, and certainly don't delete that PTR because the buyer has to get it. Some buyers don't even know to look for it until they get it. So it's really important as an agent that you always send that along to your buyer. The next thing I want to talk about is known as estoppel letters. E-S-T-O-P-P-E-L. Estoppel letters. And it irritates me when I hear people call these demand letters. I even hear people in the title and escrow business sometimes say demand letters. Well, legally, there's a difference between an estoppel letter and a demand letter. A demand letter, as the name implies, is what you would send to someone when you're trying to collect money from them. That is slightly different from what an estoppel letter is. In a real estate transaction, an estoppel letter is sent to everyone who might have a financial claim on the property, right? So this goes back to doing that title search as well. We need to know if there's a mortgage company, we need to know if there's an HOA, anyone else who may be owed money by the time the property closes. And the estoppel letter is going to be sent by the title company to that entity that might be owed money. It's going to say we are anticipating closing escrow on this property on a particular date. As of that date, what will be the balance? And that is how we uncover things like unpaid HOA dues, condo association dues, liens, assessments, that sort of thing. We need to be able to pay those in full at close of escrow so the buyer starts clean and fresh and does not inherit any of the seller's debts. So that process of sending out those estoppel letters occurs between the preliminary settlement statement and the final settlement statement. That's how we know what numbers are actually going to take effect as of close of escrow. Next thing on my list that title and escrow companies take care of for us is the survey. Now, if we go back in time, surveys were a standard part of virtually every real estate transaction. We used to do an inspection, an appraisal, and a survey in virtually every transaction. But in the 1980s, a lot of lenders dropped the requirement for doing surveys, and that's predominantly because a lot of the newest construction that's happened in the last few decades, certainly here in Southern Nevada, has occurred within a common interest community, where that community has been registered with the county. All of those lots have been designated and filed with the county. So now when we do a residential transaction, we typically do not do a survey unless a survey is requested by one of the parties. Now, commercial transactions have a lot more surveys, or when we sell land, the survey is a lot more common and could be requested by a lender. But the vast majority of residential transactions in Southern Nevada do not require a survey to be done. And just in case you're not familiar with the survey process, the survey is conducted to determine two things, okay? First thing that a survey determines is where the boundaries of the property actually are. Sometimes we are deceived when we see maybe a block wall, or we see a fence, or we see a row of hedges or trees or that sort of thing between a couple of houses. We tend to feel or believe that that is where the boundary is between the properties. That is not necessarily the case. It is possible that the two parcels sitting side by side are of different sizes, possibly with different setbacks. It's possible that the wall or fence or trees or hedges are actually on one side of the property line and may not constitute the true boundary between the property. So that's one reason that someone might choose to do a survey. The second thing that a survey determines for us is the actual size of the property. Most real estate agents go into MLS and they see a lot size of 0.23 acres as an example. How many real estate agents do anything at all to verify that size? Most don't, right? So therefore, the buyer does retain the right to do a survey so they know the actual size of the property, okay? So survey covers the boundaries and the size of the property. And since that is an option in a real estate transaction, I want to make sure that we talked about it a little bit, and then we will revisit this concept in Class 5 where it appears in the actual purchase and sale agreement. The next thing that I want to talk about for title companies is the assisting of ordering the resale package. Let's take a little bit of a look at that. When the property that we are transacting is located in a common interest community, meaning in a homeowners association, a condo association, or cooperative association, CIC is the umbrella term for those, by the way. When the property we're transacting is located in a common interest community, Nevada law says that the buyer must get a copy of that resale package. Now, as the name implies, resale package, that does not apply for new construction. There's something else that applies for new construction that we'll be talking about in my video series, Class 3. So resale package is when the property is a resale property, meaning we're not buying it directly from the builder, we're buying it from the previous owner of the property. Now, resale packages can be difficult to order because there can be different types of resale packages. If anyone watching this video series lives in Summerlin or lives in Green Valley, just two examples, you automatically have two associations and you may have two resale packages in the transaction. There are even some places in Southern Nevada that have three associations, believe it or not. So we need to make sure that we get the right packages in the transaction, and this is a big deal. This is actually state law. This is not a contractual thing, it's a legal thing. There are rights that come along with the resale package. Most importantly, the 5 calendar day right of cancellation that a buyer has, and that 5 calendar day clock only starts ticking when the buyer actually receives that resale package. We're going to address that in more detail in Class 3 as well. What I'm talking about now here in Class 2 is the ordering of the resale package or packages. It's typically done online now. And also, most associations have different costs for the resale package depending on the speed of delivery. So a normal package might take 10 days. They might offer an expedited service where you can get the package in 3 days. I'm just making up these numbers to illustrate. And then they might have an emergency service where you could get the package in as little as 1 business day. So if you have not ordered the package in a timely manner and you're faced with needing to get that package to the buyer very, very quickly so we can close escrow, you might want to take advantage. But I can tell you that a faster delivery incurs a higher expense. So this is the reason that we involve the title company. The title company will make sure that we order the right packages at the right time and that we're paying the right expenses. And although we're going to circle back and talk about this more in Class 3, I just want to mention that Nevada law, which has changed several times over the years, now states that the seller must pay for those resale packages. It's not something that can be negotiated. We cannot override that with a clause in our contract. That is a seller-mandated expense. The next thing I want to talk about for title companies is the underwriting of the title insurance policies. So title companies act as underwriters, basically insurance agents, not insurance companies, and they underwrite for the title insurance company. In a real estate transaction, there's often two different title insurance policies, and each of those has two different names. So let's talk a little bit about that. Typically in a real estate transaction, we have what's known as an owner's policy, or sometimes called a seller's policy. That is something that should be standard procedure in every residential transaction that we do. Now, despite calling that the owner's policy or seller's policy, it actually protects the buyer. I know that can be a bit confusing. But the owner's policy, sometimes called seller's policy, protects the buyer in the amount of the purchase price of the property. The second policy that we have in many of our transactions goes by either buyer's policy or lender's policy. That's the same thing. And that policy, which would not exist in a cash transaction, by the way, is designed to protect the lender. So whenever the buyer is getting financing in a transaction, it's important and a requirement of the lender that we have that second policy called a lender's policy or a buyer's policy. Now, it is legal if the parties in the transaction choose to use different title companies. Actually, the seller can use one, the buyer can use another one, and although that is legal, that is extremely rare in Nevada. Typically, we do allow one title company, such as Driggs Title Agency, to underwrite both of those policies and provide that complete bundle of services. The next thing I want to talk about for title companies, something that is near and dear to my heart and probably yours as well, is what's known as commission instructions. Let's talk a little bit about that. Commission instructions actually refers to a document that a title company will provide to the brokers sometime prior to close of escrow. Now, the law does not stipulate when they have to do that. So some title companies will do it shortly after opening escrow. Some will do it 20 minutes before close of escrow. That's their prerogative to do that. However, I want to caution you that some title companies, in error, will forget to do the commission instructions document at all. In fact, as I am filming this video today, I was dealing with this situation literally last night, where a transaction closed escrow. The title company failed to get the brokers to sign off on the commission instructions. The commission ended up being wrong. Unfortunately, the agent did not follow my advice, the advice that I'm giving you right now in this video, and they allowed the transaction to close without having the commission instructions. And unfortunately, the commission that the title company paid out is wrong. So let me say that differently. If you're a real estate agent, it is critical that you get commission instructions, you verify what's contained in those commission instructions, and you get the brokers to sign them before you ever allow escrow to close. Now, commission instructions document is something that is issued to the brokers, and it will delineate the amount of commission that we are expecting, as well as any processing fees that are being collected. The vast majority of real estate companies today, TR Realty included, have a processing fee that is charged to the client as part of the transaction. And it's disclosed up front, so there's no surprises. We'll be talking about that in a different video. But we want to make sure that if the real estate agent wants the client to pay that processing fee that is contained in the commission instructions, also, we want to make sure that if we are getting 3% as per MLS as an example, that the commission instructions also indicate 3%. Now, Nevada is very broker friendly. And in Nevada, the commission is the property of the broker. So some title companies will send the commission instructions document directly to me. When that happens at TR Realty, we will actually reach out to you, the associate, to have you verify everything before I sign off on it. Some title companies send it directly to the agent. Well, if that's the case, if you receive commission instructions, again, you need to verify that everything is accurate, you need to initial it, and then you need to send it over to the TR Realty Compliance Department for my signature. I cannot and will not sign commission instructions at TR Realty unless and until my associate has seen it, verified all of the amounts, and actually initialed on that document. At that point, it is sent to compliance for my signature. We return it to the title company. We also send a copy to the agent as well for the agent's records. But you must make sure this is accurate, because if a transaction closes either without commission instructions or with an inaccurate amount in the commission instructions, too bad, too late, it's over, the toothpaste is out of the tube, we can't go back and correct the commission or processing fees later. So, word of warning on that. The next thing that I want to talk about for title and escrow companies is that they coordinate the settlement and they act as the closing agent. When I say coordinate the settlement, we're coordinating documents, we're also coordinating people, because we need people to sign the correct documents so that we can go ahead and close escrow in a transaction. The title company knows exactly what those documents are and the timing of those. So Driggs can do something known as electronic notary, because closing documents need to be notarized. Now, if you go back in time, people who wanted to buy or sell real estate in Nevada had to be in Nevada. They had to go to the title company's office, where an escrow officer would go through the documents one by one, explain everything, verify the identity of the person who was signing those documents. That physical presence was required. Over time, we were able to adopt mobile notaries. And that technology, if you want to refer to it as technology, is still available to us today, meaning that you could buy or sell real estate in Nevada, being in another state, being in another country, as long as that place recognizes notary services. So anywhere in the US would be good, and several other countries are okay as well, because they have a trustworthy system of notary, just like the United States. So, mobile, as the name implies, mobile notary is a notary who can go to you wherever you happen to be, your office, your home, meet you at the airport, anywhere in the United States, anywhere in several countries around the world. But in those places where, quite frankly, we don't trust the notary system, it's not a trustworthy system, we had always required the customer to go to an embassy or to a consulate. In case you're not familiar with the difference between an embassy and a consulate, embassy is always in the capital city. That's where the diplomats are housed. That's kind of the headquarters, if you will. And the consulate is like a branch office. And when you're dealing with countries like China, as an example, that are geographically very large, there's not only the embassy, but there's several consulates around the country to make it more convenient for people to go. If you had to travel across 6 time zones to get to the embassy, you can imagine that would impose quite a hardship on a lot of people. Well, recently, we've been able to take this to a whole other level thanks to Driggs Title Agency, and that is the electronic notary. Driggs Title can now circumvent the mandate to go to a consulate or to go to an embassy by using their brand new electronic notary service. I'm very pleased to announce to you that Driggs can do electronic notary, which means they can do closings anywhere in the world. This is a fantastic service that Driggs provides. Now, as part of those documents that need to be signed for closing, if the buyer is getting a mortgage, there are certain documents that need to be conveyed to the lender so that the lender can fund the loan. Funding the loan means the lender is literally wiring the amount of the mortgage to the title company, so those funds can be added to what's already on deposit, and we can disperse funds at the time of closing. So the lender will require certain documents. The title company knows about them. They get them signed. They have a contact person at the lender. They send those documents to the lender. At that point, the lender will release the funds by wire to the title company so that we can proceed with our closing. Another service I want to talk about at the title company is the preparation and recordation of the deed. So in times long ago, when I was selling real estate, recording a deed meant somebody, typically a runner who worked for the title company, would get in his or her car, drive to the county recorder's office, Clark County, Nye County, what have you, stand in line, and wait for the assistance of a clerk who would stamp those documents, record the deed, and then we would have legal conveyance of ownership at that point. Well, that system still works today when we need it, and I'm going to come back to you in a minute and tell you why we might still need it. But most title companies, including Driggs, are now doing something called e-record. E, of course, standing for electronic recordation of the deed. And what that means in English is title companies don't need those runners anymore. They don't need to send someone down to the county, standing in line and waiting for someone to stamp a piece of paper. Title companies can now record deeds electronically. And that is how we do most of our deed recording at this point. Now, I said I would circle back and tell you why we still have the old system. This might seem like a silly little piece of trivia for you until the time that you actually need this, and then this can be huge for you. So in Clark County, the cutoff every day for electronic recording of deeds is 4 p.m. The old style, going down to the recorder's office, standing in line, the deadline is 5 p.m. Now, again, that might not sound like a big deal. What's the difference between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m.? Let me tell you the difference. If you have a purchase and sale agreement with an expiration date of today, and for whatever reason you weren't ready to go in the morning, perhaps it's the lender, it's often the lender, that is slow. And we talked about the lender has to send the funds by wire. Sometimes, folks, the buyer and seller have signed all the documents. Everyone's ready to go. Agents are ready to go. Title company's ready to go. But we're waiting on those funds to be wired from the lender. We sit, we wait. It's 1 o'clock, it's 2 o'clock, it's 3 o'clock. We're wondering, are we going to get that wire today? Are we going to be able to record today? Well, if that doesn't happen by 4 p.m., then if we use electronic recordation of the deed, that's actually going to push us to the next business day. That would really suck if it was Friday before a holiday weekend, right? Now the buyers lose out on getting possession of the property for the entire weekend. And of course, the seller is still paying his expenses as well. Sometimes when we are up against the wire, no pun intended, we need that extra hour. Title companies are not going to advertise that they still do it the old way. They're not going to tell you about it in many cases. But if you are up to that 4 o'clock time and we really, really want to get that buyer into that property today, I just want you to know we do have that one more hour of time that we could go back to the old school way of doing things. Somebody from the title company can drive down to the recorder's office, get the deed recorded, and we could convey that property today. Now, a couple of other comments I want to make on that 1 hour difference. If you're up against that 4 o'clock time and you're unable to record, keep in mind that you're going to need both parties to consent to extending close of escrow another business day. Keep in mind, they don't have to consent. So I've seen cases where we are literally minutes over the deadline and the seller has demanded extra compensation or concessions of some sort in order to agree to extending one more day. We don't want our properties to default. And the other reason I tell you about that hour is in the case of a short sale. You might not only have a purchase and sale agreement that's about to expire, you might have short sale approval that is also going to expire today. And if we can't get the deed recorded, we have to go back to the lender and ask for more time. We might not ever get it, and the entire transaction might be derailed. Now, several times in this video, you've heard me use the word title, and several times you've heard me use the word deed. So I think this is a good time to make sure that we understand that these two words are not interchangeable. Let's talk about the difference. When we use the word title, we're talking about the legal right to use a property. The legal right to use a property. Title is not a document. The deed is the actual document that is recorded in the county where the property is located. So the title is the concept, the rights of the owner of the property to use that property in quiet enjoyment. The deed is the actual document that's recorded in the county that is legal evidence and proof of ownership of that property. Okay? Just want to make sure we're clear on that. Let's continue with our discussion of title and escrow by talking about the concept of dispersing funds. So we've talked about earnest money deposit. We've talked about the lender sending funds by wire to the title company. And we've also talked about the fact that during an escrow period, there are funds that accumulate from the sources we just talked about. There's also possible seller contribution and other sources of money. All of that money is sitting in a trust account until the time that we actually close escrow on that property. The title company is required that as soon as we have recordation of the deed, they must disperse all of that money. They cannot keep those proceeds, sit on those proceeds, earn interest on them, etc. The title company will now take all of that money as per that settlement statement, and they will disperse those monies to the parties entitled to receive them. So, some cases, the seller may have an existing mortgage that needs to get paid off. In some cases, there may be association dues or fines or assessments that need to be paid. Real estate brokers need to get paid. Of course, the title company takes theirs as well. The mortgage broker might be getting fees in the transaction. Everything that you see on that settlement statement, this party gets this much, this party gets that much, the water company gets paid, the trash company, all of those things, that is all part of disbursement. And disbursement is done by the title company, and it is done virtually immediately after recordation of the deed. And that brings me to a discussion of the term close escrow. So earlier in this video, we talked about the phrase open escrow, and I told you the two things that are required to open escrow. Well, actually, in the state of Nevada, in order to close escrow, 4 things have to happen. So this is a term, so I put it in quotes. This is a term that real estate agents throw around. Hey, we're going to close escrow tomorrow. I want to make sure that we all understand exactly what it means to close escrow. Let's talk about those 4 components. So one component is the parties have to sign. Buyers and sellers both sign closing documents. Now, in the state of Nevada, they can sign in either order. It's not that the buyer has to sign first or the seller has to sign first, but the parties do have to sign. Next thing that has to happen is the loan, if there is one, has to fund. And as I said earlier, the funding of the loan means the lender is sending that amount of money that we have, that we're getting for the mortgage, that has to be transmitted to the title company. The third thing that has to happen is the deed has to be recorded. And as I mentioned, the deed is recorded in the county in which the property is located. And the fourth thing that has to happen is the disbursement of funds. Everybody gets their pound of flesh in the transaction, and if there's anything left, that goes to the seller. So again, the 4 components of closing escrow. Parties have to sign, the loan has to fund, the deed has to record, and the funds get dispersed. And when we have accomplished those four things, we can now say we have closed escrow on a property. And the title company must send copies of all those final documents, including the final settlement statement and a copy of the final recorded deed, to all of the interested parties in a transaction. Now that we've gone over a list of services and features that a title and escrow company actually provides, we need to go back and look at some things in a lot more detail. And that's what I'm going to do right now. And I'd like to start this segment of the video by talking about something called the Good Funds Law of 2009. Before 2009, title companies were getting hurt, financially hurt. People were committing fraud on title companies. People were actually making fraudulent financial instruments at home. People were able to create bank checks, of course fraudulently, at home. Now, if you go back in time to when I was selling real estate 100 years ago or so, it used to work that the title company would call the buyer's agent on the day of closing, and they would give us a number, and we would, carefully write that number down. This is the exact amount of funds that the buyer needs to bring to the closing. We would often take our buyer to the bank and stand in line, and we would get a bank check or a certified check that matched to the penny the amount of closing funds that the buyer needed to bring. And what used to happen is we would go to the title company. Title company would look at the check, and they would see the bank's logo on the check. They would verify the amount, that it was exactly what we needed to close. And typically they would take physical possession of that bank check. They would put it in a file folder somewhere, and they would proceed with the signing and the recordation, everything we talked about to close escrow. Well, it might be a day or two or so before that escrow officer closed out the file, submitted that instrument to the accounting department in the title company, and where that actually got deposited, only to find out that in fact that bank check, that money order, that certified check may have been a fraudulent instrument. What can we do now? The deed has been recorded, the parties have been paid. Well, we can call the Attorney General's office if we want to and file criminal charges, as we should, against the perpetrator of that crime. But the transaction is over, and now the title company may be hurt very, very badly by what just happened. Title companies wanted to do something about this. So they sent their lobby up to Carson City. What can we do to protect ourselves? Fast forward to the point that the Nevada legislature came up with something called the Good Funds Law of 2009. And the Good Funds Law of 2009 states that the title company is legally required to have verified all funds before they are allowed to record the deed. So what that means in English is about a week or 10 days or so before close of escrow, title companies no longer accept physical instruments. A personal check, a money order, a bank check, a certified check, etc. Typically, within the last week or 10 days before close of escrow, the only way the parties can convey funds to the title company is electronically, and that is to stave off any possibility of fraud. Now, if you've got an old school customer who insists on using those financial instruments, they have the right to do so. However, keep in mind it's going to delay our closing. We're going to need an addendum, we're going to need all parties' consent, and that's going to delay us from closing. When it comes to the earnest money deposit that we've referred to several times in this video, we at TR Realty do not accept cash. If your customer has cash, they're going to have to convert that to a bank check or a money order in order for us to take possession of that and then subsequently deliver it to the title company. I will tell you, in our market, a lot of title companies have stopped taking money orders completely. They only take a personal check or a certified check for a earnest money deposit. Of course, they'll take wires as well. but a lot of title companies don't take money orders anymore. Driggs does. Driggs will still take a money order for earnest money deposit. And as I mentioned earlier in this video, it's important that the buyer's earnest money deposit is made payable to the title company, preferably Driggs Title Agency. We do not want to put our buyer's earnest money into the trust account of a real estate broker. And here at TR Realty, since we are a green certified company, we try to avoid those paper instruments anyway. We encourage wires. Wires can't get misplaced. You can't spill your cup of coffee on a wire. Wires can't bounce. So due to liability and due to the fact that we are a green certified company, we really want to get away from those paper instruments, and we want to use a wire for EMD whenever possible. The purchase and sale agreement, the way it's written right now, and we will get into this in my videos for Class 5, but the way it's written right now says that earnest money deposits must be conveyed to the title company within 1 business day of effective contract. And remember, effective contract is one that has been signed by the parties and delivered to the parties. Only when we have that provision of delivery can we start counting our business days from that point forward. So we must have delivery, and then 1 day after delivery to the parties, 1 business day, we have to deposit that EMD at the title company. Now, that's not a law. That is something that is pre-printed into our purchase and sale agreement. It can be changed by mutual consent. If you've ever encountering the situation where the parties want to open escrow in more than 1 business day, in other words, in a slower period of time, please come to me as your broker and let me handle the language for that. But just keep in mind, unless we change the standard language, the buyer is required to open escrow within 1 business day of having an effective contract. I want to talk about the release of earnest money deposits pre-effective contract and post-effective contract. Pre, of course, meaning before, post, of course, meaning after. So let's talk about that. Let's say you're out with a buyer, and the buyer writes a check and gives you, the agent, a physical paper check. So now when you convey the offer to the listing agent, you can include a copy of that check to show the sincerity of the buyer. In fact, that's where the term earnest money comes from, earnest money deposit, because earnest is another way of saying sincere, right? So we like to include a copy of that with the offer to show the sincerity of the buyer. So let's say the buyer hands you a check, you write an offer, the buyer signs the offer, and you send it over to the listing agent. Maybe there's no response yet. The buyer calls you up and says, you know, I've been thinking about it. I changed my mind. I really don't want to buy this house at all. I want to move to Prescott, Maine. I don't want to be in Las Vegas after all. Please cancel that contract and go ahead and give me my check back. Can you do that? So the answer is yes, you can do that, because actually you're not canceling a contract, you're canceling an offer. See, the seller has not signed and delivered that offer. In other words, it is not yet an effective contract. So upon request, pre-effective contract, yes, we can give the buyer his earnest money deposit back. However, the situation changes 180 degrees when we talk about post-effective contract. Once we have an effective contract, as per the contract, that earnest money must be deposited. Now, most real estate agents know that. They know once there's a contract between the buyer and the seller, the earnest money has to go to the title company, even if the buyer is planning to cancel the contract within a couple of days or maybe even now. That's pretty clear. Here is where real estate agents can get in trouble. It is that small window of time between having an effective contract signed and delivered and the end of the next business day. Because again, we have that one business day to open escrow, right? So if the buyer changes his mind within that period of time between effective contract and the deadline for opening escrow, that's when agents can get in trouble if they return that financial instrument to their buyer. They may not do so. Once we have an effective contract, whether we have already opened escrow or not, we must open escrow as per the contract. And remember, opening escrow includes the delivery of the EMD to the title company. Now, here's something interesting for you. In the state of Nevada, once EMD goes into escrow, there are only 3 ways to get it out. Number 1, we get the EMD out of escrow by actually closing the transaction. Now, that's our favorite way to get it out, right? Because that's when we as real estate professionals get paid. Second way to get that EMD out of escrow once it's in there is mutual consent. In other words, the buyer and seller have to agree. The buyer gets it back, the seller gets all of it for some reason, they're going to share it some way, they're going to donate it to charity. Yes, I've seen that a few times. However those parties agree, mutual consent, that's another way to get that EMD out of the escrow company. And the third way, and the final way in the state of Nevada, is with a court order. If one of the parties should go to court and get a judge to grant a court order releasing that EMD, that would be the third way. So again, the 3 ways to get it out once it's in would be closing the transaction, mutual consent, or court order. Outside of those 3 ways, there is no other way to get the EMD released in the state of Nevada. And here's something interesting as well. The state of Nevada has no statute of limitations on the amount of time that the title company can hold that EMD. So what that means is they can hold it in perpetuity. If we do not close the transaction, if we do not have mutual consent, and if we do not have a court order by a judge, that earnest money deposit can stay at that title company forever and ever and ever. As per the contract, you'll see this in my Class 5 videos, the title company is able, it's legal to do this, they can charge a small administrative fee every month for carrying that on their books. Most title companies in this market charge only $5 a month. You can imagine, EMD is typically in the thousands of dollars. How many months it's going to take to chip away at the rate of $5 per month. Nevada is not a round table state. What that means is either party can sign first. Some states, like Florida as an example, are round table states, meaning that the parties actually get together and sign simultaneously. But here in Nevada, either party can sign first. I want to talk about the cancellation of a residential purchase agreement. And actually, canceling transactions is the #1 reason that agents need their broker. Did you know that? So cancellation of a residential purchase agreement actually takes 2 documents. I want to make sure that everybody's clear about this process. First, one of the agents needs to draft a document. Doesn't matter which agent does this, but the document is known as Notice of Cancellation of Purchase Agreement. Second, the title company will then create their own document, which is generically known as a release and cancellation. Okay? So first comes the notice of cancellation of purchase agreement that is drafted by the agents and effectuated by their clients. Then that document will be forwarded to the title company. The title company will then do the second one, which is called a release and cancellation. And those are the 2 documents that are required to officially cancel the contract and disperse the funds. And that's what the term release and cancellation means. Release as in EMD, cancellation as in cancellation of the contract. Let's take a look at that first document, the Notice of Cancellation of Purchase Agreement. And this is a form that you can easily find in Transaction Desk. The Las Vegas Realtor Association provides this along with roughly 100 others for our convenience. And here at TR Realty, we do use this form. So this is one of the handouts. Please get it in front of you, and let's continue looking at this document. It says, pursuant to the purchase agreement dated some date, including all related documents on property known as, that's where we would put the address of the property, between buyer and seller, we need to put the names of the customers as they appear in the purchase and sale agreement. It says, cancellation of contract and escrow, select one. So buyer, seller, or both buyer and seller hereby cancel the agreement for the following reason. So we need to make one of those three choices there. Which party is initiating this cancellation, or are the parties initiating it together? And then it says, choice number one, as permitted by the good faith exercise of paragraph number blank of the residential purchase agreement. So if one of the parties is attempting to cancel the contract because of, let's say, the due diligence period, let's say the loan contingency or the appraisal contingency or the failure to provide disclosures, or whatever reason the party believes they are justified in initiating the cancellation, we would go ahead and use paragraph 1, and we would indicate the specific paragraph in the RPA that the buyer or seller thinks will protect them to allow that cancellation. So that is one of the three choices. And then it says, or per mutual agreement. And if we choose that option, basically, it doesn't matter what's in the contract. It doesn't matter if the parties are within their due diligence or within their loan contingency. None of that matters. Both parties are agreeing, hey, we want to get out of this deal. So that's what mutual agreement would be, and that is the second choice. Or the third choice is other. So if there were some other circumstances that led to the cancellation, perhaps we couldn't get clear title. That might be an example of using that third choice. So again, to reiterate, where it says buyer, seller, buyer and seller, we need to choose one of those three. And then, as permitted by a certain paragraph, per mutual agreement, or other, we need to choose one of those three as well. After that paragraph, it says buyer and seller hereby cancel escrow number, and title companies will assign a number to each escrow, so we would put that number there. With, and where it says with, we have a blank line. That's where we write in the name of the title company. And then all of that is followed by buyer's initials and seller's initials. We need both sets of initials in order to continue with our cancellation. So that is the cancellation part of the contract. The second half of this form goes on to talk about the release of EMD. Remember, I said this is generically known as a release and cancellation. Release as in release the EMD, cancellation as in cancel the contract. So we've just dealt with the cancellation of the contract. Now let's talk about the release of the EMD. And there are four choices here, and it says select one. So the first one says, as permitted by the good faith exercise of some paragraph, seller authorizes release of buyer's EMD to buyer. Or the second choice, as permitted by the good faith exercise of some paragraph of the purchase agreement, buyer authorizes release of buyer's EMD to the seller. So the language is almost the same between choices 1 and 2. Pay particular attention that choice 1 is going to give the EMD back to the buyer. Choice 2 is going to give that EMD to the seller. Paragraph 3, almost the same again. As permitted by the good faith exercise of some paragraph, both buyer and seller acknowledge mutual cancellation of the agreement, and authorize escrow holder to continue to hold the EMD until receiving subsequent mutual instructions or a judicial decision. That choice would allow us to actually cancel the contract. It will allow the parties to get on with their business. It will allow the property to go back on the market, but the EMD is still in dispute. So we agree on canceling the contract, we just don't agree on why, and we don't agree on who is supposed to get that EMD. That is paragraph number 3. And paragraph 4 is another situation where we could use other, some other reason. I mentioned earlier that sometimes the parties split the money, sometimes the parties give the money to charity, sometimes the parties give the money to me. No, I'm just kidding, that never happens. But that would be a case where we could use that 4th section. And once again, you see that the buyers and the sellers both have to initial. So we have one set of initials for canceling the contract. We have another set of initials for releasing the EMD. And then down the bottom of the form it says, unless otherwise specified, buyer and seller release each other from all obligations to buy, sell, or exchange the property pursuant to the agreement. Buyer and seller further release each other from all claims, demands, and actions that buyer and seller may have against each other by reason of the agreement. The parties intend that all rights and obligations arising from the agreement are null and void. And whether we have done just the cancellation of the contract or the cancellation and release of EMD on this form, regardless, the parties need to sign and date at the bottom. And I realize that where it says date, it doesn't have a place for time. I recommend we put the time. Now, if we're doing this document electronically, it should be date and time stamped to the second anyway. But if we're doing this by manual signature, I recommend that we add the time next to the date. So that is the form known as the Notice of Cancellation of Purchase Agreement. This one, followed by the title company's own release and cancellation document, that would enable us to cancel a transaction. If you do any amount of business at all, folks, you're going to be canceling transactions. It is an unhappy, but it is an integral part of what we do as real estate professionals. Now, I want to talk about something known as a lis pendens, and that is spelled L-I-S, second word P-E-N-D-E-N-S, lis pendens. It's actually a Latin phrase that means lawsuit pending. I need to mention for the record that I am not an attorney. I'm not qualified to give any of you legal advice, and I'm also not trying to give any of you legal advice. I just want to give you a layman's understanding of what a lis pendens is and what a lis pendens does. So lis pendens is a document that is recorded in the county where the property is located, just like a deed. And my understanding is that if there's a lis pendens filed on a property, it would preclude the seller from selling that property. I also believe that it would preclude the seller from refinancing that property as well, but that's not really germane to what we're trying to do. So if there were a dispute over the EMD, let's say as an example, and again, I'm not an attorney here, I can't give legal advice or interpret a legally binding contract. But let's say as an example, the buyer feels he's within his rights to cancel. Maybe he's within his due diligence period, maybe he's within his appraisal contingency or loan contingency, or he's within his 5 calendar day right of cancellation for the resale package. Whatever reason the buyer thinks he's entitled to cancel and to get his earnest money deposit back. What if the seller doesn't agree? What if the seller is unwilling to go along with that cancellation and release of EMD? Sometimes as real estate agents, the right of the buyer to cancel is as plain as the nose on our face, but we can't give legal advice. So if the buyer were to consult with a Nevada attorney and discuss the possibility of filing a lis pendens on the seller's property, it might incentivize the seller to see the light of day and go along with that cancellation. That's all I'm saying about that. Sometimes sellers get aggravated. They feel that their house has been off the market for a while. They feel they've incurred expenses, and they want to retaliate against the buyer by not releasing the EMD. I'm not saying buyers should run out and file lis pendens. There's severe ramifications if you do it inappropriately or without cause, but it might be something to discuss with counsel. And I'll just leave that concept at that. Remember, as a real estate agent, you cannot, listen carefully, you cannot get involved in an EMD dispute. This is one of the reasons that TR Realty chooses not to hold EMD. We are putting it into the hands of the title company. Folks, let me be very clear. The Nevada Real Estate Division says if you are involved in an EMD dispute as a real estate licensee, you might be practicing law without a license. And then you'll be practicing law without a license, and you'll be practicing real estate without a license, because that is a very, very serious offense. Do not, as much as you wish to provide great customer service, do not get involved in an EMD dispute. Do not say things to the buyer like, yes, of course you're entitled to your EMD. You don't know that. Even if it's as plain as the nose on your face, you cannot practice law without a license. Stay away from EMD disputes. You cannot win, and you may get dragged into court. You may get dragged in front of the real estate division. Stay away from EMD disputes. I've got about 3 more things I'd like to talk about in this video. And the next thing I want to talk about may come as a surprise. There seems to be a common myth out there that if there's an EMD dispute on a property, that a seller is unable to sell the property to someone else. That's not true. The seller is absolutely able to sell the property to someone else. Title companies will not open a second escrow, okay? If they're aware that the first escrow is in the dispute stage and the parties are not agreeing on who's going to get that EMD, title companies, as a business practice, will not open a second escrow. But there is no standard central database somewhere where all title companies go and they put their escrows into that database. So, nothing would preclude a seller who knows about this, who's engaged in an EMD dispute at one title company, from going down the street and opening an escrow with another buyer at a different title company. Chances are that second title company will not even know that there was a first escrow at another title company. And that brings us back to the lis pendens. Because if the lis pendens is filed on the property, that is going to show up in that title search, and that's going to be a giant red flag, and that's going to preclude that seller from closing with a second buyer. I want to mention wire scams. Title companies are often potential victims for wire scams. And as a real estate agent, you need to completely stay out of conveying bank account information from the title company to your customer so they can send a wire. Stay out of it. Never forward an email that you believe is from the title company. It might not be from the title company. So when it comes to wiring money, have the title company speak directly with the customer, not via email, through you, conveying information. Get out of it, folks. The liability for scams is immense, and scams, as you can imagine, are on the rise. And I'll leave you with this interesting thought about our wonderful state of Nevada. Nevada actually has the 3rd highest rate of fraud in the entire United States. Did you know that? I would like to thank you for watching this video. I hope it was informative for you. If you are licensed with another brokerage in Southern Nevada and would like to talk with me, please text me or visit our website. See you next time.